Welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to use this gimbal, the basics, clear up any fog with the menu and all that stuff. This assumes that you've done the lesson already where we balanced it, because you need your rig balanced in order to do this. So let's get to it. I'm going to power this thing up. And I want to start with the display and then we'll go from there, okay? So when you power it up, you're on the home screen of the display. And something to understand about the display, you navigate it by swiping up and down and left and right typically. So for example, if I swipe down, I see another page of settings. And the way to remember which way to go to get back to home is to look for the little horizontal bar, and you want to grab that and go the opposite direction. So it's on the bottom, so I'm going to grab it and go back up. And then I'm back at the home screen. If I swipe up, another page of settings, and then the horizontal bar is on the top. And you'll notice this page also has dots on the bottom, and that indicates there's another page of settings that you get to by swiping left and right. So to get to the second page, you swipe left, and you'll see the dot move, and to get back, you swipe right. And you can grab that horizontal bar and pull it down to get back to the home screen. From the home screen, you can also go left and right, and there's some other settings that we're not talking about in this lesson, but just know that that exists as well. Great. So let's start at home and just work our way through. So top left icon is the auto tune area. You know this because this is how we calibrated the gimbal, but go ahead and hit that really fast. The numbers on the top stand for the stiffness of the motors. So we've got tilt, roll, and pan. And then beneath that, you have normal and super smooth. So if I choose normal, which is the default, and say calibrate, it's going to calibrate it for normal operation. If I say super smooth, it's going to calibrate it differently, and you'll see the numbers on all of the motors go up. And DJI says that's for scenarios where you might be running after somebody. Now let me say this. The gimbal does a great job at balancing, okay? But if you're running and bobbing it, that up and down motion, that's one motion that it's not going to handle. And the way to do that if you're running or when you're walking or whatever is to just keep your upper torso as still as you possibly can, or just keep it from bobbing. It's going to handle all the other stuff fine. You can also touch each of the individual numbers, the individual motors, and give it a custom setting if you wanted to. And you can play around with that, but they give you very granular control on how this gimbal responds. We're not going to calibrate now, we've already done that. Hit the top left arrow. The next icon, the top right icon, gives a general status of the balance of your gimbal. You want it to be green. If it goes yellow, it means it's struggling a little bit, and that's fine. You just don't want it to be doing that all the time. If it's red, something's really off. In fact, if you're hitting red or even yellow a lot, I would, if you can, I would probably power the gimbal off, unlock it all, and check my balance again, and then run calibration again, and then that should help. Now, if you touch that icon, it's going to give you more detailed information. You see it gives info on pan, a couple tilts, and then your roll. And if you lift your gimbal up and tilt it like 15 degrees, you'll see it start reporting on all those. And again, green is good, yellow's struggling a little bit, red is bad. So just keep in mind, if you're getting red, you need to balance it, something's off. Or calibrate it again. The next two options we're going to cover at the end of this lesson, so we'll tuck those away for now. Let's go ahead and swipe down to get to the control center. On the control center, we've got a lock on the top left. If you hit that, it just locks the display so that no one can bump it and accidentally change a setting while you're using it. To unlock it, swipe up on the display and then swipe up again, and then it'll unlock. And then you have to swipe back down to get back to the control center. The Bluetooth icon. So this is really cool. If you go to your Pocket Cinema camera, go to Settings, Setup, in the third screen in to your Bluetooth area, and then hit that Bluetooth icon and click Confirm. You'll see your camera show up on the gimbal, and it's going to ask for a code, and look back on the Pocket Cinema camera for that code. And so now it's connected with Bluetooth, which is really nice. For example, there's a little record button on the gimbal itself that I can now use to start and stop record on the camera. So when I'm holding the gimbal, instead of messing with stuff up here or starting it in advance, too far in advance and just wasting drive space, I can be in position and just start and stop record over Bluetooth, which is super nice. You can also do it with another camera control cable, like we have plugged in the focus motor here, which we cover in the next lesson. But you could take one of these cables, plug it into the USB-C port on the camera, and then plug it into the top port over here on the gimbal, and that would also let you start and stop record, communicating with the camera that way. But that's another cable. You're tying up the USB-C port. Bluetooth is really nice. And then if you want to disconnect it, just tap it and then choose disconnect. The bottom left icon just lets you kill sound on the gimbal if you want it to be completely silent. And then the gear icon gives us other settings. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's some specific ones I want to touch on. The very first option is disable selfie. I always have this enabled because I don't want it to go into selfie mode accidentally. The next one is orbit follow. What that is for is if you're doing a shot where you're walking around a subject, you know, if you remember in The Dark Knight when the Joker crashed the party and then he's talking to Rachel and telling her all the stuff about his scars and the camera is moving around them in a really cool way, which I'm sure they had a Steadicam. But if you want to do something like that with your gimbal, DJI says this orbit follow mode will help it be a little smoother. So that's something you can play around with if you're doing that type of shot. Next, push mode. If you touch that, you have push pan or push tilt. So what is this about? This is very helpful if you're in a scenario where you want to manually position the gimbal, because if you try to do that, the gimbal is going to fight and you're going to probably hurt the motors if you do it too much. But for example, if I enable push pan, then it lets me position the gimbal and the Ronin will hold that position for me, okay? Same with push tilt. So that's really nice for certain scenarios. Horizontal calibration, what's that about? Sometimes you might see your rig is a little off kilter, and this is a way to fix that. You can just tell it to calibrate. And if that doesn't fix it, you can choose the manual method. I'm going to back out twice and go down to Gimbal Auto Check. What it's going to do is put the camera in different positions, or the gimbal in different positions, and just make sure things are working correctly. So it's not a bad thing to do before you start shooting, just to make sure, after calibration, to make sure everything's dialed in. It says auto check complete, gimbal status good. Awesome. So I'm going to hit the back arrow on the top left, grab that horizontal bar on the bottom and swipe up. And now I'm going to swipe up again to get to some other settings. Joystick speed and joystick smoothness. So what are these about? Well, we haven't talked about buttons, but there's a little joystick right here. Lets you move it around. It's really nice. If I hit joystick speed, I'm currently at slow. I can be slow, medium, fast, or enter a custom value. I'm going to set it to fast, and let's take a look at the difference. Much snappier, right? Now let's take a look at joystick smoothness. What does this have to do with? Well, you'll notice when I move this and let go, it stops abruptly. That's because my smoothness is set to low. I'm going to change it to high, and again, you can put a custom value in here. But if I set it to high and I let go, you see it takes longer to stop. It's a smoother stop. It's not as abrupt. Right? Very nice. Moving on down, dial functions. So there's a dial on the front of the gimbal here, and you can map certain functions to that dial. For example, right now, my dial is set to pan. I could also set it to tilt, roll, etc. I'm going to back out. Dial speed, very similar to joystick speed. You just don't have any pre-configured settings. It's just a little dragger that you set to a certain speed. Now I'm going to swipe left to get to the next page of settings. And here we have dial smoothness, again similar to joystick smoothness. Reverse dial, if you wanted to reverse the movement for any reason, you could do that here. And then the M button. There's a little M button, which we'll talk about in a second, and you can change the default mapping of that M button if you don't like what it's set to. So I'm going to grab the little horizontal bar and get back to the home screen. Cool, now let's talk about the trigger, dial, and the various buttons on this gimbal and what they do. Let's start with the trigger. So the trigger's on the very front, below the dial. One thing you can do with the trigger, if you double tap it, it puts the gimbal back in its default position, which is super nice. If you hold the trigger down, it puts the gimbal in a lock mode, which we're going to talk about in a second when we talk about the different follow modes. The dial can be mapped to different functions. We've already looked at that in the menu. Let's move over to the right-hand side. We've got the power button, you know what that is, but one thing the power button does, if you hold it, it turns it off, right? But if you just tap it, it puts the gimbal in a sleep mode, locks all the motors, but it doesn't pack it up like normal. So I can still grab it by the handle, move it around without it freaking out on me. And if I just tap that again, it wakes it back up. Now let's talk about the buttons and the joystick facing us. So we already talked about the joystick, right? We know what that does. The M button, if you hit that once, it locks the display, and you can tell that the display is locked by the little lock icon on the top left, and this is the same lock that was in the control center. The button's just mapped to it, so it's easier access. If you hit M again, it unlocks the display. If you hold M down, it puts the gimbal in sport mode. We're going to talk about the follow modes in just a second, but let's say you have the gimbal set up where it's silky smooth, you're doing tracking shots and nothing crazy, but then suddenly something in your scene requires some really rapid movements. Well, instead of going in and messing with settings on the gimbal, you can enter sport mode and it will make the gimbal respond to things brisker. So it's a nice feature. As long as you hold him down, it's in sport mode. If you hold him down and double tap the trigger, it locks it in sport mode, and you can tell by the little running person on the top left, just like where the padlock showed up. And then you hold M, double tap the trigger again, and it'll take it back out of sport mode. The record button, as we already talked about, can start and stop recording your camera if you're using the control cable or if you're connected via Bluetooth. Now let's talk about what I keep referencing, and it's the follow modes on the gimbal. So if you're back at your home screen, you've got two lower icons. One on the lower left that says which follow mode you're in, and the right one lets you adjust the speed. So what is follow mode? Here's what it is. Right now I'm in PF. PF stands for pan follow. Here we go. In pan follow mode, the gimbal is only going to follow my pan movement. So let me recenter it. So if I'm just doing this, it's not going to do much. Why? Because I'm not moving the handle. The gimbal responds to my handle movements. See that? I'm telling it to pan. If I tilt, it's not following my tilt. It's only following my pan in this mode. And then I can adjust the speed that it does that. Now if I change to PTF, that's pan tilt follow. Now if I tilt, it follows that more. If I go into the speed, I can choose slow, medium, fast, or custom. And if I choose custom, I hit the pencil on the top right and give it a specific value. So you saw pan follow, pan tilt follow, which is going to follow 2. Then we've got FPV mode, which is following the pan, the tilt, and the roll, okay? And it gives a different look to the footage. And when you're in FPV mode, now that lower left icon can be tapped and there's other settings. For example, 3D roll, 360. If I set it to that and push my joystick, pretty cool effect, right? And I can hold that down so you could follow someone and get this really weird tunnel effect, etc. If I go to portrait, it puts the camera sideways, kind of in portrait mode. And then if I go to custom and hit the pencil icon, I get tilt, roll, and pan options. So what's that? Well, if you think about it, our pre-configured settings are pan follow, pan tilt follow, or follow all three of them, but there's no tilt follow. Like what if you want a certain combination? What if you want tilt and roll follow or just tilt follow? Well, you can do that here. So if I just do tilt, reset it, love that reset trigger. So now if you look, it's totally ignoring my pan, right? It's just going to pay attention to my tilt. Let me do that a little better. See? There we go. And then I could obviously do another combination. So that's really nice. And then again, you go to the lower right icon to adjust the speed of all those. And if you do custom, again, you highlight the pencil and you can put a custom value in. So this is really cool. Hopefully now you're thinking about, okay, I can pull off some really sweet shots with customizing all this and getting used to it and practicing. Now I talked about earlier about the trigger, I think I mentioned this, the trigger having a gimbal lock mode. So what's that about? Let's say I'm in PTF mode, pan, tilt, follow, and I'm in a shot, but then I suddenly don't want it to respond to my pan and tilt anymore. If I hold down the trigger, now I'm holding it down, look, it ignores everything, okay? So it's an amazing way to briefly step out of the mode that you're in if you need to. That's super handy. And there's just so much more you can do with this gimbal, and hopefully the sport mode makes a little more sense now, right? If I was at slow speeds, but I held M down and double tapped the trigger and went into sport mode, it's going to respond to things faster. It's going to respond to my movements faster. In fact, let me just show you. All right, so I've got my follow speed set to slow, and I'm in pan follow. Okay, now I'm going to jump into sport mode. Much faster, see? So it's nice to be able to hold M down, trigger, and jump into that, jump in and out of it. So these are the things you just have to use and practice to really get to know your gimbal. Now again, I haven't said this in a while, but it's all about story. It's fun to get caught up in this cool stuff you can do, but this isn't a music video, right? Story needs to be supported. It needs to be, shots need to be typically motivated by story. And I mentioned this before, you can take that too far. If you want to do a cool shot, do a cool shot. But in Reckoning, most of my shots are just tracking, pedestal, just normal stuff. But in situations like The Dark Knight that I mentioned, that scene where you're orbiting around, hey, that's a really cool effect. And I've seen that in other movies where it just was perfect for the moment. And so you're going to have stuff like that. You might want a moment where the camera is doing this and going to a weird angle to suggest that something's off, you know? And well, this can do that slow move into a Dutch angle for you, etc. So you get it. The more you understand this, the better your shot list is going to be, the better your movie is going to be. And I just can't believe what DJI has given us as independent filmmakers with these gimbals. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about how to pull focus with the focus motor that comes with this Pro package. It's really cool. You can do it multiple ways. So I will see you in that lesson very soon. If you have any questions about this, please hit up the community. And I think that's it. See you soon.